Good morning and welcome to Friday. Thank you very much for joining today. This is the final in the set of webinars that we've been running as Cadence Innova this week. We started the week with some Teams overviews and deeper dives into meetings and collaboration with Teams and using the Teams mobile app. Those webinars are still available if you wish to click on the same link to join the same webinar and see what's happening that way. And we'll be posting the recordings to those on our YouTube channel probably. But I'd also point out that we did a couple of Skype sessions if people are still using Skype for Business earlier on in the week as well. The session today was designed to just give you some ideas of some other tools that may help you collaborate while you're working from home, probably quite a bit. A number of tools that some people may know about, a few tips and tricks that might make things a little bit easier for people to understand when they're using Office 365 a little. I have a partner with me today. One of my colleagues, Louisa, has joined us today to help answer any questions that might come through the Q&A window, which I'll be taking you through in a second. Louisa, do say hello.
Morning, everyone.
Thank you very much. And if I make any mistakes or I completely go off track, then I'm sure Louise will keep me on track as well and honest. Let's have a little look around the window that you're using to view this webinar in case you haven't used a Skype for Business Broadcast meeting before. We've used Skype for Business Broadcast, and I'll just call it Skype Broadcast to make it shorter, for the main reason of it's very easy for people to join. Going forward, we'll probably use its replacement, which is called Teams Live Events, but that does require you to use the Teams web app, which, if you hadn't attended the Teams sessions at the beginning of the week, might be a little uncomfortable. So we made it this solution, which is a simpler web-based solution. What we have is we've got the window that you're looking at. Hopefully, in the top left-hand corner, you'll find there is the title of what's going on. And just below that, obviously, you see the big window that we're talking through today, which has got the slide being shown on it. Just below where you see the slide, you'll find there is a play and a pause button on the left-hand side. There is a slider which will allow you to go backwards or forwards through the webinar. If you're watching it live this morning at 10:30 on the 3rd of April, then you'll find there is also a live button next to that play button. So if you want to just catch up to where we are live, you can click on that at any time. Over on the right hand side, you'll find there's a volume indicator and a diagonal arrow that will make the slide or the piece that you're viewing full screen, which may be helpful for you if things are coming up a little bit small. Moving towards the top of the screen, you'll find there are a couple of links. One's a support link and one's a link through, to our Cadence Innova website, where you'll be able to find out more information about us as an organization and contact us if you have any particular requirements or you've got any particular pain points or you need any help with anything, particularly around the remote working piece, but generally as well. Just to the right of that, you'll find a couple of arrows that pushes that Q&A window on the right hand side away, again to give you a bit more space so you can see what's being shown. But then you'll see there is the Q&A window. Pop in your name if you wish, then pop in your question. You can choose to ask it anonymously or you can ask it with your name, and then Louise will kick me and say there's been a question, and we'll be able to address your question. If it's particularly good, interesting or fascinating question, then we might broadcast that question and that answer, and then if you wish, you'll be able to see that question that other people have posted, and you can click the little heart to like it to let us know it was a good question. That's pretty much it from a housekeeping point of view. Not expecting any fire alarm test today, so we should be able to crack straight on and have a look at what it is that we're going to be talking about this morning. So we've done the housekeeping piece. What I'm going to do is I'm going to run through, as I say, a few tools that Office 365 offers. So we're going to look at OneDrive. Everyone should be hopefully familiar with OneDrive, but just a reminder of what OneDrive does. A reminder about groups, which some people may be using, Office 365 groups, that there is a useful halfway house, if you like, between going full on Teams and just leveraging a SharePoint site. A group's a good kind of halfway house to get you across to collaborating a little bit differently if you haven't been using Teams perhaps. We'll look at some storage options that you might have been using. I'm going to briefly go through those. That's really just a couple of pointers that might help you when you're thinking about where you're storing files and why you might want to store them in different places. We'll look at sharing links so we don't send attachments that are enormous or lose track of attachments. Using links through Office 365 can make things a bit easier for you. We'll look at a tool called Planner, which is a very simple project planning tool. and task management tool. We'll briefly look at Delve, which is something that's included in Office 365, powered by what's called the Office Graph, which looks and analyzes who you've worked with, what you've been doing, gives a lot of insights to you as a person to find out what you've been doing, but also gives a easy way of finding other work or documents that you might have been working with other people on. We'll take a look at OneNote, which is a great electronic notebook solution, which is built into Office 365 and into Office groups or teams. They all typically get a notebook just when they create a team or a group anyway, so you can use that. We'll look at FindTime, which is sort of an Office 365 tool, but it's a wide open Office tool, which allows you to easily find a time for people to have a meeting, particularly when everyone's about remotely working and not necessarily in an office. Trying to pick a good time for everyone to meet with everything else they're trying to juggle at the moment can be a bit tricky, so FindTime might help you there a little bit. And then on the home straight, we've got My Analytics, which looks at a feature that you may have enabled in your organization. It's now become included in most of the license plans that are provided for Office 365, but it gives you a little bit of a insight into the way in which you're working perhaps with mail or with chat, and how much focus time you're giving yourself, perhaps how quickly you're responding to mails, whether you should be responding to mails as quickly as that or taking some time to read them, how effective your mails are, all in My Analytics. And then the last couple of things, Excel forms for surveys. So you may be using SurveyMonkey. You may not be aware that Office 365 has a survey tool built into it. And then finally, just a brief reminder that mobile apps are available. If we haven't had any questions all the way through, and that does make it a bit more interesting. So if you're there and you want to ask a question, please do. And then we can talk through some questions at the end if we have any. Louisa herself might even have a question, which might be quite exciting too. So let's have a look at the first of those topics then, which is OneDrive for Business. So OneDrive, you are, as I say, hopefully familiar with. It's cloud-based storage, available anywhere on any device. It's provided as part of your Office 365 license. 1 second. Apologies, I needed a quick there. Provided as part of your Office 365 license, everyone should have one. Typically in your organization, it's enabled by default. You'll be able to go to it by going to your organization name. So in our case, for example, that's Cadence Innova. So that's Cadence Innova-my.sharepoint.com will take you through to your OneDrive site. You can store your own files. It's particularly important to note that OneDrive is typically used for your own files. OneDrive, it's owned by one person. It's a file that you should be owning. So it's great for things that you're working on, perhaps things that you would normally store on your PC. And we'll talk a little bit about storage in a bit. But it's an important note to point out that anything stored in OneDrive is yours. You can share it with people if you wish. But if it's a file or a document that should be owned by a group of people, then typically that's when you'd use a SharePoint site or a team or a group to then collaborate on those documents together. And then if you move to a different department or you move out of the organization, it means that that file isn't owned by you, it's owned by a group of people. And that's why OneDrive is for you and SharePoint or Teams or groups is for a group-based set of files that you might want to share. One thing that you could do right away, some organizations have set this on by default. Some allow you to make the choice, but in OneDrive, you will find there is a backup tab if you look at the settings of OneDrive. And that backup tab allows you to back up your documents, your pictures, and your documents, pictures, and your desktop folders into OneDrive. And I really recommend doing that, particularly if you're used to using the documents folder or sticking a lot of things on your desktop and using that as your filing system. If you enable that backup within OneDrive, then OneDrive will keep track of anything you store in the normal folders or stick on the desktop. And that means if you do lose your PC or run over your PC, you'll be able to get back to those files quite quickly. As soon as you get a new PC, enable that backup again, and that will then reapply all the files that you've had sat on your desktop back onto your PC. So a really effective way of backing up what you might have on your PC. It's great for ad hoc sharing with other people. So if I've got a file I want to share with some people inside the organization, perhaps outside the organization, you can do that. And you've got several options for when you're sharing things from your OneDrive. This will apply to groups, Teams, and SharePoint as well. You can require a login so that somebody would need to have a Microsoft account so they can sign in and access the file. That's probably the most recommended option if you're sharing externally, particularly, but internally as well. If you want to restrict it through to certain people and require that they sign in, that's a good way of doing that. What also you can do, of course, is you may, again, your organization may have turned off this feature, you may be able to share it with an anonymous link, which means anyone who gets that link can open that file. Then that's fine. Again, typically by default, those links expire after a certain amount of time. Out of the box, I think that's 60 days. So that means that anyone who has that link, if they send it on to somebody else, it's only valid for 60 days, which reduces your risk a little bit. But consider risk behind that as you're sending out something that anybody will be able to click on without any traceability. And that's why that first option of requiring a login is a pretty good idea. You can also store files, of course, that you might want to send via email. So instead of, and we talk about this one in a minute or two in a separate slide, but instead of sending a large attachment to everybody, like videos perhaps, or if you want to keep track of what's happening with that document, then sharing a link through OneDrive is a good idea. And you can do the same, of course, through SharePoint, Teams and Groups. What I will do is I'll just stop for a second and check with Louise to see if any questions have come in.
Sorry, I was on mute. No questions so far.
Excellent. Okay. Thank you very much. Okie doke. So we'll carry on then and look at what my next option was, which is storage for other things that you might want to look at. So if you're looking at Office 365 groups, for example, then these, as I've mentioned, are a good halfway house between the idea of having just working without Outlook and normally sending files everywhere. If you want a collaboration experience that you want to use familiar tools with, then Office 365 groups may be an option for you. And that the advantage there is that they work as a glue, if you like, for a number of the collaboration tools that Microsoft have got in Office 365. It gives you a distribution list. So as soon as you create a group, that becomes an active distribution list that you can manage as an owner and assign other owners to. It gives you a shared inbox and a shared calendar. And it also gives you a SharePoint site where you can now store and collaborate on files, a notebook and planner. Those two I will be talking about, as I say, in a little bit later on. But the advantage there is you work in Outlook, so you're very familiar perhaps with the way Outlook works. You might not be comfortable with going all the way to a real-time unified collaboration tool like Teams. So an Office 365 group is a great way to get started. Gives you the collaboration experience, so you can mail things around, you can keep people informed by sending to the shared mailbox or shared inbox. You can comment on things that have been sent to that shared inbox, and you can also, of course, start to create a shared calendar, which might have your events or your holidays for a group of people. So groups are a great halfway house if you're not necessarily, as I say, comfortable with going all the way to Teams yet. Typically they're self-service. It depends again on your organization, but typically that's self-service. So you should be able to go and create a group if you wish. And one of the nice things is, and that's why I mention it as being a halfway house, it works between teams as well. So if after a while you get Teams into your organization or you feel more comfortable with Teams, then you can simply add that Teams functionality onto a group. In actual fact, don't tell anyone, but behind the scenes, when you create a team, that also creates the group with a shared mailbox and the shared calendar. It's just that not many people get to see it because it's hidden typically to keep it out of the way. It might be worth contacting your IT department if you want to have both Teams and that shared mailbox functionality for the same group, then you can do that. It may be worth having a chat with your IT organization to find out how you can achieve that. If you want a little bit of help, there is a link there. Sorry, it's a bit of a complicated link for you to look at. Unfortunately, it's a broadcast and you can't click on that link, but that will take you through. Support.office.com is very much your friend for anything Office 365. So go to support.office.com, type into the search box what you may be interested in, and I think you'll find that will be quite useful. let's have a think about Teams. Teams has been very much in the news over the last few weeks and months. Before the COVID-19 pandemic that we're living through at the moment, it was even starting to be advertised on UK mainstream TV as being a great unified collaboration tool. Despite that, most people in the street will have heard of Zoom, but they may not have heard of Teams. You may be using Teams already in your organization. It is a great way of unifying that collaboration experience. It gives you everything in one place, so it inherits a lot of what Skype for Business offered, which is why it's replacing Skype for Business, which is going end of life in 2021. It's a brand new tool that was developed. Now it's 3 years old. It was developed completely from the ground up. As a competitor primarily for Slack, but then it was viewed as being something that they could really start to build a hub around. And so it's called, or typically known as, the Hub for Collaboration. And Teams has got some huge advantages to it. It allows you to, as I say, have status, chat, calling, video meetings, group chat, and also allows for collaboration as well. So you can use the Skype features, and if you were tuned into our Teams overview session at the beginning of the week, then that may be familiar, that you've got all of those capabilities that you had in Skype, plus some added features and benefits like being able to format messages and add emojis and stickers and things for a chat, for example. But it also brings together that collaboration experience. So when I was talking about the Office 365 group a second ago, the things that you get with a team, you do get a hidden, if you like, distribution list, shared mailbox and calendar. They're not visible, but the files piece, the notebook and the planner all become part of your team. So when you create a team of people, you'll get those collaboration tools as well. I've got a couple of links on here that might help you a little bit. One is some customer stories from Microsoft that show how other customers have implemented Teams and had some success with it. And I've mentioned, of course, support.office.com already. Some solutions like Teams and some others you'll see as we go through, support.office.com/Teams will take you straight through to the Teams page with video training, with document-based training, and also there'll be some Microsoft instructor-led courses that you'll be able to sign into and sign up for there as well if you haven't used it. Why would we use it? Well, it replaces Skype, as I say. It has that advantage of being that one pane of glass or one place to go for collaboration. So not only do we have improvements over the Skype for Business experience, we've got a much better mobile experience. If you've used Skype in the past, perhaps, then you've been chatting away in Skype on your desktop PC. You then go away from your desk and start using the mobile version of the Skype app. Some of the conversation comes across, some of it doesn't. You don't necessarily see it that well. Joining meetings has been a bit patchy, but the Teams mobile client is very closely integrated. As soon as I walk away from my PC and lock it, the mobile application knows that I'm inactive. All of my messages start coming through to the mobile application, as you would expect. But not only that, as soon as I start chatting away on my mobile, if I go back to my desktop, everything is completely synchronized 100% in pretty much near real time. So it's a very good experience from a mobile point of view. You get a great meetings chat experience as well. There are a whole bunch of features. As I say, if I would suggest you go back to the webinar we ran earlier on in the week about dedicated to Teams meetings, but having the ability to have a persistent chat across a meeting before, during and after the meeting, which doesn't really happen with Skype, is great. The improved video experience, and then of course that collaboration piece that I was talking about earlier on with those integrated services from Office 365. There's a wealth of security control and compliance features built into Teams as well. It was built very much from the thought of security from the ground up. It isn't Skype with a few bits bolted onto it. It is very much taking the lessons learned from Skype, but is a completely new piece of software and infrastructure behind it. And as I said, you can lighten up a little bit, which is always good in these excitingly trying times. We might want to add stickers or GIFs or emojis to your chats, to your posts in Teams as well. So I did want to briefly look at some of your storage options that you've probably got in front of you. Some of these may not apply to you in your organization. Some of it may do. It depends on, to a certain extent, the maturity and size of your organization. But typically, everyone has got at least one or two of these options available to them. If you've got Office 365, you should at least have three of them. And the reason I wanted to just run through them a little bit was to highlight some advantages and disadvantages perhaps you may not have been aware of for why you might want to store things in certain places. So your PC, for example, which is where you tend to work most of the time, I suspect, sticking things onto your desktop or into the C drive or onto a D drive or whatever it might be. Obviously, there are some advantages to that. Everyone's very used to doing it. That's how they've worked with PCs for the last 20 or 30 years. It's the default for a lot of programs. A lot of programs expect to store things in your documents folder, for example. I would suggest that it's a great place for you to go to obviously find stuff really quickly because you're very familiar with it. What I would say, of course, is that typically that's not backed up. If you're not using OneDrive backup, for example, then that may well be something that's therefore potentially lost if your PC gets broken or stolen. Typically, most people in most organizations now will be encrypting their hard drive on their laptop, but there may be an issue with that, or there may be risk to that. And of course, you can't share files very easily from your desktop or your documents folder either. It's all in one place. No PC, no files, can't get to them. You may be using USB sticks to move files around, and again, that's a very valid and very friendly way of working. We've had USB sticks forever. It's very portable. I like to say it's familiar and cuddly. Not that I would necessarily like to cuddle a USB stick, but it is also prone to the same problem as an advantage of being portable is also a disadvantage. It's portable. You can drop it, you can lose it. There is a risk of loss or theft. Typically, depending on your organization again, it may block USB storage, so you may not be able to put a USB stick into your managed PC device, for example, from a security point of view, but also it might not be encrypted, so if it is dropped, somebody else may be able to pick it up. One quick point about dropped USB sticks from a security point of view as well is if you find the USB stick and pick it up, then I strongly recommend you don't put that anywhere near a PC unless it's completely isolated or you have some experience with software and security. It's becoming quite common for USB sticks to be dropped around, which has malicious software on it. You put it into your PC and it immediately infects your PC. So be really careful with USB sticks. Your organization may have the traditional file storage using network drives. You may know them as the P drive or the H drive or something similar to that. Usually the infrastructure is backed up. So this time round, if something happens or you need to go back a version perhaps, then you may get that capability. But again, there is the possibility that what could happen is you need to access it when you're not in the office, and typically network drives are hidden behind being only available to you when you are in the office or on the office network or over VPN. That may not be something you can do. It also typically quite often works quite slowly across those types of links as well. There is no, unless your organization has deployed network drives particularly effectively, it's typically only single version again. So you would need to say V1, V2, V3, and potentially start to have that problem of multiple copies as well if you're trying to work offline. So if you need to access that file and then go and work on it, perhaps you're working in the garden with no network connection, as opposed to being in a plane, which nobody is in at the moment, then you may need to copy that file onto your desktop, for example, make changes to it, come back into the office network or on VPN, and then you suddenly discover that somebody else has made changes to it, and it's a bit tricky. You can't co-author very easily. So SharePoint, it gives you some great options from that point of view, whether it's just a standalone SharePoint site or whether it's a group or it's a team. Now you're looking at something that is always available. As long as you can get to an internet connection, then you can access that. It's shareable internally and externally. You get typically, again, organization dependent, but you'll get 25 terabytes of storage per site or per group or team. It's not owned by a person, it's owned by a group. So when I was talking to you earlier on around the OneDrive piece, the group ownership means that now it's not something that's specific to you, it's specific to a group of people. SharePoint, it's underlying SharePoint, so that applies to groups and teams that's using exactly the same solution, if you like. Automatically allows multiple versions, so you can go back in version history through a file. You no longer need to save version 1 and version 2. And instead of sending attachments, you can send links. Like I said, we'll talk about that in a few seconds too. It is, however, viewed as being a bit complicated sometimes. People are familiar with other cloud-based solutions, and that may be applicable for your organization. So I'm highlighting, of course, Microsoft solutions, but there is Box and Dropbox and a number of other Google-based cloud storage solutions available as well, all of them having very much the same sort of advantages and different limitations. So SharePoint, for example, limited to a 15 gig maximum file size. Other solutions are offering higher file sizes than that. And I've talked a little bit already, of course, around OneDrive. So very similar to SharePoint, but it's for files that are owned by you. So it's not for formal groups or projects. You should use a group or a team or a SharePoint piece for that. But the same advantages apply. And also with the OneDrive Sync tool, you can synchronize files, or the file structure at least, onto your PC, so that if you are either working again away from a network, or if you want to move files around quickly and effectively, then synchronizing using the OneDrive desktop app, which works with OneDrive and SharePoint sites, would be recommended. So hopefully that's highlighted a few advantages and disadvantages of various different places. What would I recommend? Well, I would obviously recommend anything that I store, I put into OneDrive. I'm backing up my document pictures and desktop folders into OneDrive, so I know I've got those secure. And anything I use to share with a group of people, or I want to collaborate as a group of people, then I use a Microsoft team or a group. And if it's something that's need that collaboration experience, but I need to be able to share as a group of people, then SharePoint is what I use. So USB sticks are a thing of the past. Network drives are a bit of a thing of the past for me. And storing it on my PC doesn't matter now because it's backed up to OneDrive. So I've been talking about this sending of links to files quite a bit. And I thought I'd just highlight that a little. So it works for SharePoint and OneDrive files. It will work for other cloud-based solutions, cloud-based storage solutions as well. But it has some advantages that you can do it either from the SharePoint or OneDrive site. So you can highlight or tick a file, choose share, and you can choose to then share it however you want to share it, either with anyone directly with an anonymous link, etc. Again, as I was talking about earlier on, dependent to your organization settings. But you can also do it from Outlook. So if you go to the attach file option in Outlook, you may well see, depending again on how things have been set up for you, that you can attach a file or you can share a link to a file and then choose to set permissions as you want. So I would recommend that you use the sharing of links because it gives you always the most up-to-date version of the file. So when I click on that, if somebody suddenly has sent out an attachment, they suddenly go, oh God, I made a typo in it. Normally what would happen is they'd then go and fix the typing mistake or whatever slide needs to be changed and send it back out again. So that's another copy of it sent as an attachment. Sending it via a link, anyone who clicks on that link, A, it's permissions bounded. So if they haven't got access to it, they won't be able to see it. And B, of course, they're always seeing the most up-to-date version. And then C, of course, everyone can co-author and work on exactly the same file instead of sending a whole bunch of the same file around the place, asking people to fill in different bits or all in one type of place. It also means that you're sending a very small mail with just a link in it, as opposed to sending a 20 or 30 megabyte attachment, which some organizations may restrict you from sending or receiving. And so that helps as well. Those sharing pieces, by the way, when you insert the link into an Outlook email, it will show you who has got permissions to that file or how you're going to be sending that. Depending on what's been set for your organization, it could be that the whole organization has ability to edit that file or view that file. You can change that to make sure it's only certain people or whether it's anyone or whether you want them to be able to view or edit or download the file. And the reason why that's effective is if you specifically say that the recipients of an email are the only people who can have permissions to that attachment via the link, then if they forward that email to somebody else, they won't have access to it. And that gives you an element of control over who can see your files or settings. Mentioned at the beginning we were going to talk about a few other tools around Office 365 that are part of the solution and suite. And this one's quite a useful one. Planner is a very simple project planning tool. It's every time you create a team or a group, you'll get a default plan so that you can leverage that for that team or group of people. It's very simple, allows you to create buckets of projects. So for example, I might have a bucket of a project to deliver some webinars. And inside that bucket, I may have several tasks that need to be completed. I need to choose the webinar tool. I need to make sure it's been tested. I need to update the slides. Each of those tasks can be assigned a start and an end date. They can be assigned to people inside the team or group. So that people get a notification to say they've got an action they need to complete. And then out of the back end of that, as things go along, there are charts that show you per bucket or different views as to whether things are on time, whether they've been completed or whether they're late. And you can track that progress using that graphical interface to see what's going on with various different buckets of projects inside your team or group. I've mentioned a couple of things around the actually creating a plan. As I say, if you create a group or team, that will create a plan for that group or team. If you go the other way around and go to tasks.office.com, it will show you all of the plans you've been invited to, and you could create a plan too if you wish to. That's a lot of twos in one sentence. Apologies for that. But that does mean that you'll get a group. So it will create a group around a plan if you choose to create a plan from tasks.office.com. If I update any of the tasks that I've been assigned, then that will automatically go out to the group if I choose to, so I can keep people up to date with what the progress is on my plan. And you can add comments and of course, as I say, well, it does interface into Project. If you're using full-blown Microsoft Project, then there is a connection now available between your Planner plan and Project. It's a little bit early days for that. I suspect more will grow with that as we go through. But if you have got some simple project planning requirements, or you want to keep track of some tasks for your group or your team of people, then I'd recommend looking at Planner. I mentioned also Delve as being a great way to find things, and it looks at who you work with or who you chat with a lot of the time. So it will look at your organization structure. It will look at who you've been interacting with behind the scenes, and try and surface those people. So if I've been chatting away to Louisa a lot on Teams, which I have over the last week, unfortunately for her, trying to say, well, we need to get this sorted for the broadcast or that sorted for the broadcast, then any documents that I've shared with Louisa or any documents that Louisa and I have in common that have been shared by other people, I can see those through Delve. It's a really quick way of getting back to files that you might have worked on. So if you think, I worked on something 2 weeks ago and I can't remember where it is, it could be on a SharePoint site or a team somewhere, then you can simply go through to that to Delve, and it will delve to office.com, and it will then show you the files you've worked on, show you the files that people you work with have worked on. And it may well be I worked with Louisa on something perhaps 3 weeks ago, and I know I can just go to Louisa, look at what she's been working on that I have access to, and I can see. One thing before I go too far on, I've seen a couple of organizations have actually disabled Delve in the past or have currently disabled Delve, and that's because they're seeing files or somebody has noticed that a file that they can see through Delve is a file they shouldn't necessarily be able to see. So permissions, which is something we could run a special webinar on all on its own for an hour. Permissions in SharePoint, OneDrive, Teams groups is very important if you are leveraging Delve. The same thing applies to search, of course. If you go and search in SharePoint, it's going to show you all the files that you have access to. But Delve really puts it front and center that you may well be looking at somebody else's profile to see if you can find something you worked with together, and you'll notice that there is a file there perhaps that you should have access to. Making sure your permissions and people understand how permissions works will make Delve very effective, of course, because it means they only see what they have access to. It's not Delve surfacing something that you don't have access to. If something's been incorrectly permissioned, Delve will show it to you. While you're making sure that your permission structure is correct and in place, I would recommend that you look at it that way and make sure that things are doing what you're expecting them to. But you can get things together into one place. It's not only for finding files and things you've worked on, it may be for finding people as well. You can update your own profile, which updates some attributes in Office 365, so you can search across Office 365 to find somebody who may have done a similar project or might have the same skills as you. Then Delve will allow you to update that profile and allow people to see what it is that you're interested in or working on, and that's kind of extendable. So I'd recommend looking at Delve if your organization still has it enabled, and it will show you what a great way of trying to find things and people that you've been trying to locate in your organization. I've mentioned OneNote a little bit at the top of the session today. I tend not to use paper notes. I haven't for a number of years, but a lot of people still do. In these days where we are more remote working, of course, then the ability to electronically capture notes and then send them to people is a great way of working. So OneNote is a tool that's part of the Office 365 suite. So when you have your, when you've opened your OneDrive, for example, that will typically give you a OneNote for you to use to capture your own notes. You can create as many notebooks as you like. So it could be a notebook for things you're working on this week. It could be a notebook on tips that you might want to have. The advantage is it keeps it all in one place. Every team or group, and typically SharePoint site, will give you a shared notebook for that group of people. So if you do want to work with the group and make sure that meeting notes, for example, are captured in one place, then OneNote's a great way to do that. Teams does have a meeting notes feature in it. So when you create a meeting in Teams, you'll find and join that meeting, you'll find there are some options in there for you to create meeting notes. They just stay inside Teams. They're a little bit low feature, whereas OneNote allows you to create and pull together things from all sorts of different sources, whether it's a web page, a video you've seen, something you've snipped from a Word document, an entire PowerPoint file. You can put anything into OneNote. It is very much like a notebook for electronic items, and you can type anywhere on it. It's not like working in Word where you have to kind of go down a page. It's very free form. If you have a tablet type PC, it also handles and supports handwriting recognition, so that you can just write onto the screen and it will update that. And it also allows you, if I wanted to, capture the notes in OneNote, and if people haven't got access to the OneNote or they want to see it come into mail, you can choose to just straight away email that page as well to people. You can capture anything you like, but typically in a meeting, for example, you might want to capture and start the agenda off, capture any actions and put some notes in. And as I've mentioned, every team or group gets a shared notebook to start with. It's a Windows app. The OneNote that came with the Office productivity suite, like Word and Excel, etc., stopped at Office 2016. So you can still get OneNote 2016, but it's not being developed. It's not being improved. The version that's being improved is the Windows app, so available from the Microsoft Store. Is OneNote as a what's known Universal Windows Program, so UWP app, or platform app, and that gives you access to it on your PC. There's a great mobile app for it, and you can use it web-based as well. If you want to know a little bit more, support.office.com/OneNote will help you there as well. If you did want to create some surveys or quizzes, both internally for your organization and externally as well, typically organizations have used things like SurveyMonkey, for example. Office does have a solution built into it, and it has the ability to create a highly customized survey. Probably the only thing that I've found with certainly the version of Forms for Excel, or Forms as it's known, forms.office.com, the only limitation I've found with it is that I can't have multiple choice options in a survey that are picture based as opposed to text based. But you can do branching, you can do conditional access to certain sections of your survey, for example. It'll capture choices, texts, real-time text, formatted text as well, if you wish. But it also gives you the capability to do it internally inside your organization and capture people, so they have to sign in to their normal Office account, their Office 365 account, and it captures their email address, so you don't have to ask them for who they are. But if you're sending it externally, of course, that typically goes out as an anonymous survey. So you would need to capture name and email address if you want to get back to people that are completing the form. But then you get some great analytics out the back end of it. It's not necessarily as full featured perhaps as dedicated tools, but it does give you the pieces that you're typically going to want, and all of the answers for the survey will drop straight into an Excel spreadsheet. And you create them very easily, typically from OneDrive or a SharePoint site is where I'd recommend you start. You can start at forms.office.com, but if you want control and easier access to that Excel sheet, then start it as what's known as a Forms for Excel sheet. So go to any OneDrive or SharePoint folder and click New, and then choose Forms for Excel. That will ask you to create the Excel spreadsheet and then start to design the form, and that's the way I recommend people do it. The format of the surveys come out really well, whether you're working on a desktop PC or a mobile app. You can even preview what it's going to look like. You can even generate a QR code. So if you want to do that, and you were in those dim distant past days having a conference or a workshop, and you wanted people just to capture that QR code to fill in that survey, you can do that. And if it's a quiz, you can even randomize the answers or randomize the questions. I'm not sure why I've written the word randomize answers. I really mean question, for quizzes as well. It's a great little tool. It's, as I say, available free of charge as part of the Office suite. It's just a little known options. And again, support.office.com/forms will take you through to training and information and to dig a bit deeper into it. One of the nice things that it does report back is how long it's taken people on average to answer the form, for example. So it can give you a bit of an indication as to whether your form's a little long or a little short or confusing people. That can help too. And you get a graphical view of what people have been answering very quickly, as well as being able to dive directly into that Excel sheet and do some direct analysis or extraction of data perhaps. I mentioned at the top something called My Analytics, which used to be an extra cost option for Office 365, but is now, as I say, included in most licenses. It may or may not have been enabled in your organization, but it allows you to get some insight into what you've been doing as far as mail, and now has recently added in Teams chats as well. You'll notice it as being a button in Outlook called Insights, which you may have noticed in the top right hand corner of Outlook, or you may be getting a weekly update that tells you some of the insights into how you've been working with mail. It allows you perhaps to look at the way in which you've been interacting with email and chat, how many times you've been picking up an email and doing the driven by Outlook piece, which I have a tendency to do sometimes. I wait for an email to come into Outlook and then I click on it, pounce on it and immediately reply. It'll show you if you're replying really quickly to mails. But it also shows you when you've been having focus time for yourself, whether you've been in meetings a lot of the time, when you've been effective in those emails that you send out. You can find out how quickly people have been reading your mail, whether they've been reading all of your mail or not. Gives you some great insight into the way in which you've been working, and really particularly starts to help you from perhaps a well-being point of view to point out some things that you could do to make your life either easier or perhaps less complicated. One of the things it will do, for example, is show how much you are sending or receiving mail at midnight, for example, when it should be probably something that you're not doing. But it will give you an indication of how much time you're doing that out of hours. Perhaps you can set your working hours inside Outlook, and then the insights will correspond to when you've set those working hour times. It's a really useful tool to potentially help you concentrate on where you're spending your time, and identify perhaps that you're not being as effective in email or chat as you might want to be. Does depend, as I say, on to a certain extent license and whether your organization has enabled it or not. The last thing I wanted to touch on was just to remind you that most of the Office 365 options I've been talking about today have got mobile app versions behind them as well. They're mostly available for both the iPhone, iOS, iPad and Android devices. I would recommend certainly Outlook Mobile as being a good use of an email tool. We've seen some problems running native email or native calendar, so using the iPhone calendar or iPhone email perhaps. Email not quite so much, but the calendar certainly has caused some problems with Office 365 in the past. somebody who decided to decline a meeting invite or accept a meeting invite has typically sent that meeting invite back out to everyone by accident. So leveraging Outlook for calendar contacts and email, the Outlook mobile app has some advantages to it. It's directly synced. It doesn't use your data unless you go into it to actually look at mail, for example. So there are some advantages there. You can also create Skype or Teams meetings if you have that enabled for your organization directly from Outlook Mobile, which you can't do from the native calendar app. And you can set your out of office reply and move things around. It also highlights and surfaces any groups you're a member of as well. So using Outlook Mobile is much more aligned to the Outlook desktop experience, perhaps. The Teams app is probably the second one I'd recommend installing very much. The status, chat, call, video, join meetings, all of those things. There was a dedicated session on Teams mobile app earlier on in the week, which if you're not familiar with it, I'd recommend you go back and have a look at. I'd certainly install and add the OneDrive app. The OneDrive app gives you some alerts. So if somebody shares a file with you, for example, it'll give you a little pop-up. But it means that you can view your files, edit your files in OneDrive and SharePoint. You can also capture. It's got a built-in capture option. So if you're trying to capture receipts or you're particularly now working from home, haven't got access to that multifunction device and you can scan things, then OneDrive has an option to automatically format and view a document that you've put on your desk. When you take a picture of it, it will crop out the background and make it look like really quite a good copy of the scan you were trying to do, and that scans directly into your OneDrive. And the last one that I'd probably highlight, there are a whole bunch of icons on the left hand side because you can do the individual apps as well. But there's a new app that's been released in the last couple of months called the Office mobile app. It's just Office mobile. And that brings together the other apps that still are available standalone, Word, Excel and PowerPoint, but it brings them into a single app. It allows you to even do things like scanning text. So you can put your phone's camera or your mobile device camera over a document. It will scan the text and then allow it to go straight into a Word document that you can start to edit. So it's quite a powerful little mobile app, being developed quite quickly, and I would suggest we'll have new features added to it quite often. So I recommend the Office mobile app. But if you pop in Microsoft into the stores, into the Google Play Store, into the Office app, the Apple App Store, you'll probably find a number of options. Your organization may be heavily using Yammer, which is not something I've mentioned today, for example, or using Power BI. Then you'll find there are mobile versions of those to work with them quite effectively as well. That pretty much brings me to the end of some of the tips I was trying to highlight, or some of the services that get included as part of Office 365 you may or may not have known about. I am sitting at about 17 minutes past the top of the hour. Louisa, have we had any questions come in?
No questions.
Excellent. I might then turn it on the other side, turn its head and say anything that I've gone through today that you have any particular questions on.
No, I think I knew about most of the applications, and
Excellent.
Some of them I've already used, especially
Excellent.
the well-being and how productive I am in a week.
So you've been using the My Analytics piece. Yeah. I do find that quite useful to try and keep me straight when everything starts to get a bit bonkers as far as mail coming in all over the place. I do find that quite a useful one to look at. Thank you. Have you used Find Time at all?
No.
Again, it's one that depends on kind of how busy your schedule or other people's schedules that you're trying to get together on. It works internally and externally, but particularly for people externally, I really recommend Find Time. It really helps you to stop that backwards and forwards of, well, can we meet at 10:30? No, let's meet at 11. Well, I can't do 11. Well, let's have a cup of coffee at 12. You could just offer those options up. And then go through those options to say, yes, I'd like to have that as a good time. That's my preferred time, or that's my alternative time. So I'd recommend Find Time as being quite a useful one to have. Good. If we don't have any other questions in, and I can't think of anyone wanting to listen to me drone on for much longer, particularly on a Friday morning, I would suggest that pretty much wraps us up for today's quick run through and quick webinar. I'd like to say thank you very much to Louisa for joining me and being my support. Thank you very much. And also thank you for joining today. Thank you, Louisa.
Thank you. It was my pleasure.
Thank you. And also to say, of course, stay safe, stay well. If you do need to find out any more information or you have got other questions, please do put them into the Q&A window. That will stay live for the foreseeable future. We'll keep an eye on it to make sure we answer your questions, even though they've not necessarily been read out live in today's broadcast. But it's been great to talk to any of you that are out there. If this is very popular, then please, again, do get in touch through our website to let us know if you would like us to run more of these sessions. Otherwise, at 20 past the hour on Friday morning, just before the Easter holidays, how exciting, I'll say thank you once more. I will say again, stay safe, stay well, look after yourselves, and say thank you very much for joining today. Goodbye and have a good weekend. Thank you very much.
Bye.